Fire Emblem GX appears to be the most ambitious title in the history of the series. From what we've seen in the latest trailer, Intelligent Systems seem to be making some big changes that show the new direction in which the series is heading. Remember, this is the first home console Fire Emblem title since 2007's Radiant Dawn on the Wii, so it's not far-fetched to expect some deviations from the previous games to shape the future of Fire Emblem. My name is Xenon, and today I'm going to share my thoughts on the recent trailer for Fire Emblem Three Houses and speculate on what these changes could entail for one of Nintendo's most beloved gaming franchises. Let's go. In Three Houses, you take on the mantle of Teach at the Goregmok Monastery's military academy, giving you the responsibility of fostering the growth of the students/soldiers training there. Immediately, this puts an interesting spin on the usual tactician role from most Fire Emblem games. Normally, the tactician follows a young lord on their quest to resolve political drama. Along the way, you recruit soldiers, mercenaries, and other types of characters to fight for your cause. In Three Houses, however, the classroom dynamic may imply that your army will remain static throughout certain portions of the game. Rather than slowly building up your army through the course of an adventure, you may receive your full army in the beginning, with that particular army being whichever class you chose. However, it's entirely possible that the game will allow you to recruit new students from time to time. There's also the possibility of recruiting allies from other houses. For instance, if you chose to teach the Black Eagles, perhaps advancing the story will allow you to interact with the students from the Blue Lions or the Golden Deer. Then again, you may also meet characters outside of the school that will be able to join your ranks. Not to mention, your units could also consist of characters that aren't even students at all, such as other teachers, perhaps mercenaries, and trained professionals. Considering that Fire Emblem usually starts off with smaller threats before transitioning to large-scale political conflicts, I can see the story exiting the school environment and the nearby skirmishes at some point and entering the larger world battles that take place between the three political powers. Throughout the trailer, we constantly see the main characters, Edelgard, Dimitri, Claude, and even Byleth, displaying a close bond of friendship or camaraderie. Most notably, they all seem to get to know one another during their ride to the monastery, but seeing as this is Fire Emblem, it's entirely possible that they'll all end up fighting against one another as the plot progresses, even more evident as the game wants you to pick a side. Which, by the way, I'm all for Team Edelgard. Speaking of picking sides, it's entirely possible that each faction you choose will represent a route in the game's overarching plot. This isn't anything new to the series, but the way it's implemented may shed some light on Intelligent Systems' philosophies regarding branching storylines. Fire Emblem isn't a stranger to having stories where you take control of multiple separate armies, all having their own perspective in the wars to come. We've seen this in games such as Sacred Stoners and Radiant Dawn. Both of these games have different approaches for handling multiple perspectives. In Sacred Stones, the game has two different routes that each have their own take on the overarching plot. While both of these routes will converge later on, playing through Ephraim's route will not show you what happens in Erica's route. This is different in Shadows of Valentia, where the game is constantly switching between both Alm and Celica's perspectives, meaning you experience both of their journeys throughout the entire story. It's entirely possible that Intelligent Systems will attempt to improve upon the idea of having multiple perspectives or routes in Three Houses. As such, the story may change depending on who you side with, perhaps even changing the areas that the story will take you. If, let's say, you sided with Edelgard, perhaps you'll end up spending most of your time in the Adrestian Empire, while if you sided with Claude, maybe most of your missions could take place in the Leicester Alliance. This is interesting to think about because having multiple routes can cause the game to have a much higher replay value, while also showing multiple sides of the conflicts that occur throughout the story. If they opt for having different routes, then it means we'll have to play through the game multiple times to acquire the full story, but if they opt to switch perspectives throughout the story, then we'll only have to play through the game once to understand what happens. Both of these options drastically change the way the story is presented. Having these perspectives of multiple sides of the conflict can cause you to care more about the characters, since you'll understand more about what is at stake, making it quite difficult to root for one single house. Despite all that, I can definitely see 3 houses having multiple routes, since the trailer did emphasize the fact that you must pick a side, which in that case makes it easier to root for whichever house you chose in the first place. In the end, it's unclear whether or not the 3 houses will even go to war against one another. Perhaps there is an even greater threat emerging. It's common for Fire Emblem to have plots centered around powerful figures being consumed by the spirit of a malevolent god, usually in the form of a dragon. We know the Church of Seiros maintains the peace between the 3 houses, but for how long can they maintain that peace? Seeing as their goddess seems to be involved with a dragon, the story may take the turn for a worse with the corruption of maybe the pontifex of the church. Three Houses is shown to have a new skill system that seems to build upon previous skill systems in Fire Emblem. The trailer shows off some of the new skills that your units will be able to learn, most notably the addition of the Fighting, Faith, and Reason skills. Judging by their icons, Faith and Reason can be interpreted as both anima magic and healing respectively. In the trailer, we can see this guy named Casper beating the crap out of this church soldier using a new type of weapon, with that being his gauntlets, which also corresponds to the new fighting skill. It's nice to see the developers experimenting with new weapons, especially when they finally allow you to punch your enemies in the face. In addition, it seems that they're bringing back the authority skill from the Yggdrasil and Tellius games, which makes a lot of sense considering the way Three Houses likes to present its battlefields. Each unit is accompanied by their own horde of knights, who naturally perform better under sufficient leadership. In the previous games, authority was known to increase hit rates among your units, so it's a nice touch to see that your squad is aiming better under the guidance of an authorized soldier. Surprisingly, Intelligence Systems actually brought back the combat arts. In this clip, you can see Bayonetta engaging onto an enemy with the bow and opting to use curved shot. It appears that these arts will require some sort of resource to use, but in the footage, it doesn't seem to decrease her HP in the battle forecast, so maybe we'll be using different resources this time. This makes me wonder if spells are also going to consume some sort of resource like they did in Shadows of Valentia, where using magic required the user to sacrifice a bit of health. It would also be nice to see the return of a mechanic similar to Milla's turn wheel. In Shadows of Valentia, the turn wheel allowed you to rewind a certain amount of turns, acting as an escape button if you ever screwed up. This helped a lot of players save a lot of time and disappointment, as players would usually end up either restarting the chapter or feeling really bad when they lose a character. Oddly enough, the trailer seems to have shown what appears to be the main character rewinding time or having a vision of the near future, which really does remind me of Xenoblade Chronicles. However, if the protagonist really does have an ability like that, perhaps it would be the return of Milla's turn wheel. This event seems to be connected with the inciting incident that grabs the attention of the church in the first place. Perhaps the church was impressed by the fact that Byleth was able to awaken this power. If that's the case, then we can assume that Sothis, the girl in the beginning of the trailer, will be guiding you throughout your quest by giving you the power of time. It's been over 10 years since mainline Fire Emblem was on a home console. From then until now, Fire Emblem games remained mostly on handheld devices. Transitioning from the 3DS to the Switch's hardware has definitely given Fire Emblem a much needed boost in graphical presentation. One of my main concerns regarding the transition, however, was the loss of the dual screens, which were great because it allowed you to see more information without making the screen feel cluttered. This doesn't seem to be a concern anymore, as the trailers have shown that the UI is looking pretty clean. The combat is also presented in a way that resolves one of the most confusing aspects of Fire Emblem, with that being the scale of the army that you command. While many games show you that your army isn't limited to the units that you control, there are some points in Fire Emblem stories that really question just how big your army actually is. In Three Houses, zooming into the combat animations will now reveal that a much larger army is under your control, creating a sense of scale on the battlefield, akin to Fire Emblem Warriors. The character designs for Three Houses appear to have been drawn by Kudahana Chinatsu, the artist who worked on Uta no Prince-sama. As my only experience with her artwork is through Aquarion Evol, I have to say that her designs definitely feel a bit restricted in Three Houses. This may be due to Intelligent Systems wanting to use more modest colors in their character designs, but the characters end up looking a bit soulless in combination with the plain backgrounds and environments. A lot of people are quick to point out the same face syndrome that many games fall victim to. This isn't usually a bad thing, but when all the characters are wearing the same uniform and having the same static poses in their portraits, it definitely makes these similarities stand out more. On the other hand, I definitely appreciate the character designs being a bit more modest in terms of their clothing. You could also say that having characters with somewhat similar designs forces you to focus more on their personality traits and dialogue in order to differentiate them, although that's a bit of a stretch since we don't know much about the characters yet. In addition, the way the story integrates class assignments into actual missions definitely reminds me a bit of shonen anime. Perhaps there will be certain times where you get to choose the mission for your chapter, seeing as teachers usually have the power to do so, and this would be pretty interesting to give the player more choices to make them really feel like Byleth. For many fans of role-playing games, the protagonist can often make or break the game. This isn't solely due to the characterization or in-game stats of the protagonist, but by the way the protagonist fits into the overarching narrative. The trailer emphasizes the fact that the player is the protagonist, but that's exactly where problems begin to occur. When the player is given the role of the hero of the story, or the chosen one, it often leads to a narrative that focuses too much on the main character and disregards the overall cast. Judging by the pre-rendered anime cutscenes, Byleth seems to be his own character. Personally, I hope Byleth doesn't single-handedly influence the entire story, giving more time to learn about the actual lords of the game. Since Byleth does take a sort of mentor role to whichever house you chose, it's possible that we'll end up with a Robin and Chrom type of relationship, where Robin helps Chrom on Chrom's quest rather than the reverse. Regardless, these are my thoughts on the recent trailer. I think the game looks pretty good so far, taking in a lot of previous things from the previous games, while adding a lot of new things to help the series evolve. There are things that I'm a bit unsure of right now, but all of those things can really be improved over time, and with that being said, I'll probably end up playing the game a lot when it comes out. As usual, thank you for watching, and make sure to tell me what you want to see next from this channel, and have a good one.